On Tuesday, September 10th, Common Sense Institute hosted our quarterly Eggs and the Economy event. This edition was titled Unscrambling the 2024 November Ballot. Our panelists included CSI Public Safety Fellow, former Denver Police Chief Paul Pazen, CSI Mike A. Leprino Free Enterprise Fellow Lang Sias, President and CEO of the National Western Stock Show Paul Andrews, and CSI Executive Director Kelly Caufield, who kicks off the event. Please enjoy Unscrambling the 2024 November Ballot.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Good morning. Good morning. It's so nice to see all of you all today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Kelly Caufield. I'm the Executive Director of the Common Sense Institute. We're so happy you're here today. You may have noticed a slightly different setup today with our rows of seats. If you are still enjoying your breakfast and you would rather stand at the back, we do have some high tops still available. For those of you who don't know, Common Sense Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to the protection and the promotion of the Colorado economy. We are led and guided by a phenomenal board of directors here in Colorado. And if any of you all are here, I know many of you are, could you please stand up so you could be recognized? Don't be shy. CSI also has a growing number of policy fellows. We have a bipartisan set of policy fellows where we are really leading the conversation in housing, crime, energy, healthcare, and education, among others. We are joined by two of them today, and I will introduce them later. But I do just want to shout out, I was really proud to hear this. One of our former fellows, just to show how bipartisan the organization is, one of our former fellows is on a short list to be a secretary if Donald Trump becomes our president again. And one of our fellows was just speaking at the Democratic National Convention a few weeks ago on workforce development. So really proud of our fellows continuing to get, I think, national recognition, not just here at the state. I'm also excited today to announce that Common Sense Institute will have a new website. We are unveiling a fresh look, same address, but a new look, and it will go live an hour from now. So stay tuned, an hour from now, check it out. It will be mobile friendly, it will be computer friendly. And as soon as you sign up, I have one ask. Please sign up for the text message alerts, where you will never miss a report again from Common Sense. As you all know, we produce a lot here, but this will help you stay on top of the latest research. I also want to thank Terry Stevenson, who is on Common Sense's central board, for his generous support of the website. As a part of our unveiling, we will be texting 1 million new people so that they can learn about Common Sense's resources and also learn about our website. I'm also excited to announce that we have a Free Enterprise Summit coming up. I know many of you all have joined us in the past. I hope you will consider joining us again. It is December 10th at Empower Field. We are looking for sponsors, we are looking for table sponsors, and we are looking for attendees. There's a QR code here where you can learn more, and we would love for you all to be a part of that celebration of free enterprise. I'm also excited to announce that this year we will have a Master of Ceremonies for the first time, and a big thanks to Lori Leprino and to Angela Lawrence for helping us solidify Ed Green, who has a tremendous career in media. He was at CBS for, I believe, 35 years, and then finished his career at 9 News as a beloved weatherman. So I think Ed will be a great Master of Ceremonies and make the program even stronger. So we hope that you all will join us. Now for our program today about the Colorado ballot. This year's ballot will contain a number of measures that will impact Colorado households and our economy. Important issues to families and to individuals: school choice, safety, affordability, and impacts to the Western way of life. But before we jump into the ballot, I wanted to share a few recent CSI research reports that I think really set the table ahead of the ballot season. Here at CSI, we aim to provide transparency on the fiscal realities of the state. Our research and data show that voters are having less of a say in the growth of government and your effective tax burden. So first, I want to talk about a report that we issued a few months ago, which we around the office joke about and call it the Tabor Takings Report. But what this report was really showing was a concerning trend that I think is important to understand, that lawmakers this past legislative session passed 100 bills that reduced Tabor refunds by nearly $3 billion over the next 3 years. And why does this matter? It's an important trend to know because what the legislature is doing is they are redirecting dollars that would otherwise be refunded to Coloradans towards targeted tax reductions, especially for families and low-income residents. Another report that Common Sense did, I believe just 2 months ago, in partnership with Sias, our Mike A. Leprino Free Enterprise Fellow, is we wanted to look at the growth of fees. Since the passage of Tabor, which was not that long ago, in 1992, we have seen a 3,000% increase in fees. It was $742 million, that's with an M, and it has now expanded to $23 billion in 2023. And that's even continuing to grow after the voters adopted Proposition 118, which was a ballot measure intended to slow the growth of enterprise funds, which are the mechanisms for which we collect fees. But even since the passage of Proposition 118, we've seen 8 new enterprise funds being created. If Colorado's fee-based enterprises were funded by state income taxes instead of being paid through a set of fees, our current income tax rate of 4.4 would jump up to 7.7, which is a 75% increase. You know what else is increasing over the last few years? Our state's property taxes. However, that is one measure you will not see on the ballot this year. The truth is, without CSI's research, there would have been no major statewide conversation on the future of property taxes. At CSI, we are proving that facts still matter. Following our work on Proposition HH last summer, CSI has issued 6 reports over the last few months on property taxes. We also have a tool on our website where you can view the change in local property tax revenue over the past year and the past 5 years. And I think these figures will be especially helpful for voters in Jefferson County and Arapahoe, where there are some debrucing measures that you will see on your ballot later this year. So you can see what the growth of local government has been over 5 years. I'm now going to ask our 3 panelists to come to the stage, and I'm going to do a quick introduction of them. Paul Pazen, many of you all know, is our former Denver police chief, and he is CSI's public safety fellow. Lang Sias, that I mentioned earlier, is our Mike A. Leprino Free Enterprise Fellow. And last but not least, we have Paul Andrews, who is the president and chief executive officer of the National Western Stock Show. And before we jump into the panel, I'm going to do a quick rundown, I promise I will be quick, on the 8 ballot measures that Common Sense has studied this summer and will be a part of our official ballot guide available to everyone today. There's a QR code on your program where you can download the full guide. And I'm also going to try to point out, let's just do this now, for the Common Sense research team, could you please raise your hand so the staff can see? Alongside our fellows, we have Cole Anderson. Everyone's in the back offering a lot of support right now. Cole Anderson, DJ Summers, and Chris Brown. Eric Gamm as well, who may be in the back, have been the lead researchers on these projects. So if you have questions, please feel free to grab them or the fellow after this program. I'm going to start with school choice. They were all just given their official numbers yesterday, just in time for this conversation. It is now known as Amendment 80. And this initiative would essentially enshrine school choice in the state constitution. The text reads that children would have the right, if this passed, it would be a part of the constitution. Children have the right to equal opportunity to access a quality education. How is choice defined? It's defined defined quite broadly. It would be defined to include greater access to neighborhood schools, charter schools, private and home schools, open enrollment, and future innovations in education. As written, the ballot measure would be a part of the state constitution, but the full legal and financial implications are unknown. I think we'll talk about this more on our panel, where we'll talk about some recent data that suggest very strong differences in outcomes between charter school students and non-charter school students. Another measure of importance to the state is on law enforcement. This is Proposition 130, and this measure involves a one-time funding amount of $350 million to the general fund to create a new fund to support the training and support of more law enforcement here in Colorado. Chief Pazen authored a report on this measure just a few days ago, and he'll talk about that more, but the bottom line was from 2011 to 2023, Colorado's crime rate rose 26%. At the same time, Colorado's numbers of police officers per 1,000 people consistently lags behind the national average. Another measure that you maybe have seen us get a lot of attention in the news for was our study of big cats. There's a mountain lion measure. This measure would ban the intentional killing, wounding, and trapping of mountain lions, bobcats, and lynx. According to CSI's analysis, this measure actually has an economic impact much greater than what the state had estimated. Our researchers found that there would be a decrease of about $61 million in economic output if this measure passes. A big part of that is reduced hunting licenses, not just for mountain lions, but also the animals that they eat. Our study shows that if this measure passed and we had a larger population of mountain lions, there would be a reduction in elk and mule deer that could be hunted. So that's a big part of the dynamic economic impacts by the other animal populations impacted by having a larger mountain lion population. Don't worry, I'm not gonna, that's not one that you guys have to talk about that much. And then finally, if you're a Denver resident like me, you have 4 measures that Common Sense studied that are just applicable to Denver. But if you don't live in Denver, I think it's still important for you to know this, because oftentimes ballot measures are tested in Denver and then they are expanded statewide in years that follow. Paul Andrews is here to talk about these much more, but just a quick rundown. The Denver slaughterhouse measure. There is a measure on the Denver ballot to prohibit the construction or the use of slaughterhouses in Denver beginning in 2026. We think this would be the first measure of its kind in the country if it passes. Colorado is the nation's leading lamb and sheep processor, so this would have an impact on the Colorado economy. Our analysis shows a decline of about $760 million in economic output if those slaughterhouses were to close. Another Denver measure is the Denver fur ban. This initiative would restrict fur products and prohibit the manufacture, distribution, display, and sale of certain animal fur products. But the reason you see that picture on the slide is our researchers have found there may be an unintended consequence of this measure, and I think this is worth noting. Many flies that are sold as a part of the fly fishing industry contain fur and would be impacted by this measure. We know, broadly speaking, the fishing industry generates over $2 billion in economic output for the state of Colorado and supports 17,000 jobs. Not something that I certainly thought about when I first read this ballot measure. And to round things out, we have 2 measures on the sales tax impacting Denver. Currently in Denver, the sales tax is 8.81%. The first measure is being led by the mayor, Mike Johnston, and certain members of city council, which would raise Denver's sales tax by 0.5 of a percentage point to support additional affordable housing. The tax is expected to generate about $100 million in revenue. I think some key points I would mention from our report that we did on this one, we've been busy. 8 ballot measures, what we've been doing all summer, studying these. The city of Denver is budgeted to spend already about $75 million on affordable housing in '24. So this would be in addition to that investment. And finally, Denver Health also proposing a sales tax increase. That is a smaller increase, but still an increase of 0.34%. The tax would generate about $70 million in revenue for that, and the goal of this is to offset the rising costs of uncompensated care that Denver Health is being asked to bear for migrant populations and an increased homelessness population. When you talk to Donna Lynn and other members of Denver Health, they like to point out that the city has flat funded them, I believe for over 10 years now, at about $31 million. So we did a report on that, and that can also be found on our website and will be a part of our ballot guide. I am now going to move over to the panel and ask the panelists the real hard questions to make these issues really come to life and become even more interesting. It's kind of fun to have these cozy seats. Do you guys enjoy them? It's a new look. As long as I don't fall off, everything's good. Lang, I'm going to start with you just to talk more about property taxes. I purposefully wanted to, gloss over that at the front because you are really our expert alongside Chris Brown on our staff in tackling property taxes. This has been a fight for the last 18 months at least, and it's been going on even longer than that. The legislature just made a deal to avoid a ballot fight on property taxes this fall. But I'd love for you, Lang, just to help the audience understand, how did we get here? What was the compromise? And what do they need to know?
We'll see can you hear me okay on this? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kelly, and also thanks to the Leprino family. I'm the Michael A. Leprino Free Enterprise Fellow here, and I really appreciate their making that possible. I'll try and give you a sort of a very 50,000-foot view of what has happened over the last few months, because it's quite a bit, and there are a number of people in the audience here who played roles in making that happen. So let's go back to 2020 when the Gallagher Amendment was repealed, and that had played a major role in keeping residential and in particular property taxes down for quite some time. Along with that, we saw a serious run-up in home values in the 2023 assessment cycle. It was about a 40% increase in home values. We also saw in the legislature, frankly, an inability to follow through on a promise that had been made to provide a fix for the fact that Gallagher had gone away. We saw a couple of short-term fixes in a couple of legislative sessions. And then we saw in 2023, we had Proposition HH, which was on the ballot, which many of you may remember, and CSI did some extensive work with. And just very briefly, HH involved, it was very complicated, but involved essentially a trade between some near-term reduction in taxes, or reduction in tax increases, I should say, in exchange for what many people considered the real neutering of Tabor in the long run. And the result of that, as you may remember, when that was on the ballot last year, was that it failed, and it failed by about 20%, so a pretty resounding defeat. That then led to a special session of the legislature, which did not produce a long-term fix, did produce a little over $400 million in a, again, reduction of increase in taxes, because taxes have been going up during this period. So then we enter the 2024 session, right about the time that people are getting their tax bills, and they're seeing on average a 26 or 27% increase in those bills, quite a shock to the system. So then two things happen during the 2024 session and following. First of all, there was a legislative measure, a bill that was passed, Senate Bill 233, to again reduce the increase in taxes and over a 2-year period of about $1.8 billion in the aggregate. But the other thing that was happening outside the legislature were two proposed ballot measures, both 50 and 108, and I'll sort of lump them together to keep this discussion as brief as possible, but 50 and 108, which would have significantly lowered the increase, again, notice how I'm saying this, but would have reduced taxes further beyond what 233 was doing. So if you want a sort of a graphic depiction, you have revenue of existing law, revenue of 233 is less, and then revenue with 108 and 50 even less than that. And there were, a 108 in particular involved some backfill of local governments and school boards at the state level. So we come out of the 2024 legislative session with that as the environment, and that led ultimately to the special session. There was obviously concern among folks in the legislature and the governor's office that 108 and or 50 would pass, concerned about the backfill requirements there, and so that prompted a negotiation. And the negotiation in this most recent special session produced House Bill 1001, which, if I were to place it on that graphic description, you would have existing law 233, down here 50 and 108, and above that House Bill 1001. So it went beyond what 233 had done, but did not get to where 50 and 108 would have gotten us. To give just one example of a number, we have a situation where in 2025, the average taxpayer will be paying about $271 more than they would have if none of that legislation had passed, but about $500 less, excuse me, I don't want to make sure I've said that clearly, about $271 less than what they would have paid with existing law, but about $500 more than they would be paying if 108 had actually passed. That is where we are right now, and there are no, at least unless something has popped up extremely recently, there are no property tax ballot measures, and 1001, the compromise, will be existing law. For the average taxpayer, as Kelly mentioned, something to think about is how much money do our local governments need for services, given where property taxes stand right now and given the de-Brucing measures that are on the ballot. I will mention that CSI played a very strong role in all of this discussion, both through reports on HH, on 50, 108, and 233, and on the history of property tax revenue in the state. For example, in 2024, the 19% increase that we saw was the highest increase since 1975 and was about 4 times population growth plus inflation for that period, and over 5 times the growth in weekly wages. So a lot of work for us to continue to do, and hopefully we'll have an impact on some of the ongoing discussion.
Thank you, Lang. And I do expect there will be some questions at the end on property taxes. We are doing something a little bit different today. I should have noted this earlier. We have index cards, so if you have questions as you're hearing the panelists talk, please fill those out and just pass them to the end of your aisle, and we'll have staff collect those at the end. I do want to turn to Chief Pazen. I still call him the chief, the former Denver police chief. I wish you were still our chief. Would make me feel safer. So I think no one can escape it. It is on social media. It is on the news every day. These extremely scary images of potential gang violence. I shouldn't say potential. Gang violence happening in Aurora. DJ Summers did a phenomenal report on this. And we know that violent crime is still a huge challenge in Colorado. Chief, tell us a little bit more about the report that you did on the police funding ballot measure, and talk a little bit more about what you see the relationship between crime and law enforcement, and why this audience should care about that measure.
Kelly, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and I want to thank each of you for coming and spending your breakfast with us. These are important issues, and we want to share as much information as possible so you can make informed decisions. Proposition 157, or now Initiative 130, the most important part of this is without raising taxes. So this is not a tax increase by any means. And Lang has said it quite well, that the reason this is important is because the power dynamic at the state legislature decides how the state police funding is spent. And if you look at the budget for police funding from the state level, not 10%, not 25%, not 50%, goes to nonprofits, community-based organizations, or other areas. 63% of the police funding goes to places other than police departments. Now, that is a huge number. A lot of that budget went to training, to development of mental health workers, for example. And somebody that has personal experience to include leading the creation of Denver STAR program is a big believer in that. But I did that without impacting DPD's budget. Mental health is health. That should come from the public health budget, not the police department budget. So an example of this is, God forbid there's a violent crime or a shooting that happens. You have paramedics that are involved. You have fire department folks that respond. The police budget doesn't fund the paramedics that are responding on a critical incident. The police budget doesn't fund the fire department that's responding on a serious accident. Why should the police department fund health-related costs? And that's what we have done. So why Proposition 130 is so important is you're directing how that money would be spent for recruitment, for retention, to get more police officers in your community, training. It is critically important that we look at how the money is spent. And I don't know how we could say 63% of police funding going in a different direction other than uniforms, officers that actually do the hard work that keep our communities safe makes any sense. But again, this is par for the course. Oftentimes, the money is moved laterally to fund other pet projects, whether that's public safety or a myriad of different issues. It is very important that we say exactly what we want to do in order to keep our community safe, and that is to support the women and men that provide public safety in our communities.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to bring Paul into the conversation. He's been waiting very patiently up here.
It's always dangerous, Kelly, bringing me into the conversation. Always dangerous.
So, Paul, our way of life here out west is unique, and it's deeply cherished. As I did my quick run through, I talked about the slaughterhouse ban and the fur ban. And I'm curious how you see that impacting the National Western Stock Show. Common Sense Institute, led by Chris Brown's research earlier this year, found that the stock show contributes over $170 million in economic output to the state, which is really powerful. And it's one of our favorite times of year to go and take our two boys to that. But Paul, tell me a little bit more. How do you see the fur ban and slaughterhouse ban impacting you in the stock show?
Yeah, Kelly, great question, and probably some things that you wouldn't think about as far as consequences of a fur ban or a slaughterhouse ban. I'll stay with the slaughterhouse ban first, and then we'll go to the fur ban. But the slaughterhouse ban, obviously banning all slaughterhouse activity in the city and county of Denver, Colorado, would shut down the largest lamb production processing plant, I believe, in America. They are about 15% of the lamb production across the United States, and That is a gigantic portion. I think there's 200 or so employees that would be laid off. And these are hardworking men and women, and the majority of them are Latino. And so the one thing you got to know about the world of agriculture is when you attack one, you attack all. And right now, the world of agriculture that comes to the National Western Stock Show is being attacked by this slaughterhouse ban, and I'll get to the fur ban. So what impact that would bring to the National Western is this. We are today the Super Bowl of livestock shows. What that means is we are the most prestigious livestock show in the world, not just the country. And I have all 50 states coming here with their livestock to show at the National Western Stock Show every January for 119 years. Those men and women that are really our producers of protein across the country will rise up in anger against this if it passes. And that will mean they will not bring their livestock to Denver, Colorado, because they're being attacked, and they see that as a personal attack on them. So the unintended consequences of shutting a slaughterhouse in Denver start with the National Western Stock Show erosion of the Super Bowl of livestock shows down to nothing more than a rodeo, because we could still do rodeo. But the economic impact of stock show, the 171 million that Kelly alluded to, would go away, because we're getting that from all 50 states bringing their livestock here. So that is the tip of the iceberg. The organization that has put this in motion is Pro Animal Future. They are very loud about their intentions. Their intentions are to eliminate production agriculture across America and ultimately the world. No more meat for Americans, no more meat for the world. All of us are to be vegetarians, okay? I'm not going to tell them that they need to eat meat. That's not what I would do. In fact, I have a vegetarian option at the National Western Stock Show. For any vegetarian that comes to our show, there is options for them, okay? But I don't think they should tell us that we can't eat meat, okay? And that's basically what they're telling us with shutting the slaughterhouses in Denver, all right? So that one is very damaging. The fur ban is equally as damaging because, again, if you attack one section of agriculture, you attack them all. And the fur ban, you might sit here and think, well, the fur ban's about mink coats. Okay, so I'll vote no on. I vote yes on that because it's a mink coat. Well, that's not what this is about at all. This is about any product that's made with a pelt. You already saw the fishing industry being impacted. The cowboy hat that I have on here today would go away in Denver, Colorado. There would no longer be a cowboy hat for sale at the National Western Stock Show if that measure passes. And, you know, that's one of our Western traditions here, guys, and it's one we should celebrate. It's how the West was developed under this cowboy hat. So we're really, really focused on, I think the numbers are 308 and 309 on this ballot initiative, and both of them are equally as dangerous to the National Western Stock Show, because you attack one, you attack them all.
Wow, I'm seeing a lot of big eyes right now. Really interesting. And Paul, I have to ask as a follow-up, I think the parts of the stock show that I like the best, of course the bullfighting, we all love that, but I also like the shopping. And I like the vendor hall. I didn't really hear you talk about them. Paul, how would the vendors in your huge exhibit hall, how would they be impacted by those measures, if at all?
Yeah, so really we are the largest trade show in Colorado, at least Western trade show every year. I would argue we might be the largest trade show in Colorado every year, regardless of whether it's Western or not. I have 800 trade show booth spaces that are on our expo hall floor for you to enjoy shopping of everything from the cowboy boots to the cinch gear I have on to the cowboy hat to a chamois for your car if you want to wash your car. We've got guys that'll sell you that chamois right there. The fur ban would take away about 30% of our vendors. So every cowboy hat vendor out there in the city and county of Denver would have to close and relocate. The cow lot, who's been a cowboy hat maker at Stock Show for, 50 plus years has their business in Denver. They would have to relocate their business and go somewhere else. And again, this is just the start. Pro Animal Future wants this across Colorado, and then they're going nationwide. And believe me, the people in Iowa are hearing this. The pork producers have reached out to me a dozen times to say, we are flowing money into Colorado because it starts in Denver and it ends across the country. And so 30% of our vendors go away, and instead of having a cowboy hat there, I'd have to replace it with something else that's likely not a Western item, and that would be a real shame.
Well, I'm so happy that you said that, Paul, about somewhat easy access to the ballot here in Denver and statewide, and that's a big part of the reason Common Sense is expanding across the country. I love saying that. As you all know, there's 3 other Common Sense Institutes: Common Sense Arizona, Common Sense Oregon, Common Sense Iowa. Those last 2 just launched a few months ago. And a big part of that is something that happens here spreads, and it can happen in those states too. So I appreciate you saying that, Paul. You know, Lang, let's turn back to you, because you and I first met because of my passion for education workforce policy in my previous role. The first time I met Lang Sias, he was a legislator on the House Education Committee, and he was always very kind to me. I was brand new, I didn't know anyone, and he would take meetings with me. So you're not our education fellow, but you know education. I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit more about what you think the potential impact could be of that school choice measure that I talked about at the top of the program.
Well, sure, and a real shout out to our education fellow, Jason Galden, who is, I don't know if it's been released yet. If it has, it's probably been in the last 24 hours, but has put together a very informative report that deals with this question. And so I don't want to steal his thunder, but I'll take a couple of key points from it and hopefully be able to address this. Jason really focuses on the impact that this could have on expanding public charter school options to our kids across the state. And he takes a look at some very, very compelling performance data that we've seen over the couple of decades of charter schools in Colorado, and how incredibly successful they have been, and very successful in improving the performance, especially of some of our least advantaged kids, whether it's the students of color or students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch. The statistics in math and in reading are very, very compelling in terms of how their scores have improved and how they compare with their peers on average in our district-managed schools. We do have, and without getting into the nuances of charter school authorization, there are areas of the state and school districts that have been extremely resistant to providing those charter school options to their kids. And to the extent that this language in the Constitution would make that easier for those kids to have access to those opportunities, it could be, I think, very helpful for those populations. I will say, I think, anything involving new language in the Constitution and how it plays out in statute and how it plays out in how the money flows, it's going to be resolved, I would expect, in the courts. And I'm sure that there are various legal opinions floating around right now that have different views on how this would play out. So ultimately, I think it winds up in the courts. But to the extent that you expand that charter authorization in particular, I think Jason's report really explains why that would be a good thing for a population that really needs it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Lang. And I just want to make sure, can everyone hear us okay? Okay, we're with us? Okay, we take our microphones very seriously here. We want to make sure you can hear this program today. Just a quick reminder, I have about 2 more questions for this amazing panel. But we really, do you see Hemina? Maybe raise your hand, Hemina, and you all know Chris Brown. But if you need a note card, please flag them down. We would really be interested in your questions. That's always what makes the program particularly interesting at the end, where we take your Q&A. So just another plug, take a card and pass it to the end of your aisle so that we can have that conversation. I just wanted to add to what Lang said. When it comes to charter schools, Common Sense did another study earlier this year that hopefully you saw. I believe that was released in April, where we did a deep dive on one charter school network in particular, and it's one of Denver's best. It's called the Denver School of Science and Technology, DSST. They have middle schools, they have high schools, over 10, and it's growing. We really wanted to better understand what is so special about them and what are they doing well. And this was really the impetus for Jason's report that he just released yesterday on this broader charter school conversation. But what we did for the first time, I had never seen this nationally, and my background is in education and workforce policy. We wanted to understand not just how many students get into college from a high school system, but how many actually complete the credential, because that's what matters to economic prosperity. We found that for DSST, that they were having students graduate high school and completing that post-secondary credential at a much higher rate. I believe it was 43%. I'm looking at Chris. I believe it was 43% of students from the graduating class, or Cole, they were the lead authors on this. 43% of those students completed their credential within 6 years. That is 10 percentage points higher than the average Denver public school high school, and that is a huge difference statistically. So we did that for all charter schools in the report that Jason just did, because we thought that was an interesting finding. We wanted to make sure it applied statewide, and it did. Chief, I'm going to bring you back in to this conversation. I talked about gangs. I'm going to go back to it. The Venezuelan gang issue has really caught the attention, I think, of the country, and of course those who live here in Aurora, Denver, and along the Front Range. Really scary news story also just happening about, I think it was State Patrol officer who was shot at. Still learning more about that. This is not about the ballot, but it's related, I believe, to the law enforcement issue, and this will be top of mind for voters. I think it was just last week that Mitch Morrissey, one of our other fellows, we have 11, right? We got to keep track of all these guys. Mitch Morrissey, who many of you all know, is one of our Owens Early Criminal Justice Fellows, and he released a report looking at some of the gang violence that we're seeing in Aurora. Again, this is a national news story. It's changing every minute. But I'm curious, Chief, even though you didn't write that report, I'm curious what your reflections were on that report and what you would share with the audience today.
Kelly, thank you very much. What is predictable is preventable. Is there anybody in here that didn't think this was going to happen? Is there anybody? Not a one. There are remarkable similarities to what took place in Miami in the 80s. And we have to be aware of these types of challenges. And we have to really utilize data, evidence, information in order to make informed decisions. Working with the CSI team, DJ, on helping support Mitch on this particular report, one of the challenges is trying to get information on what we will call migrant crime. A police officer can't even ask the question. So if we're going to say that we have these particular challenges, we don't even have access to the data. It's not tracked. The officer will get in trouble for asking somebody status that may be here, against our country's laws. The police officer, anybody in the city and county of Denver would get in trouble. Somebody that works in Parks and Rec at a recreation center would get in trouble for asking those types of questions. So we have seen an increase, particularly in Aurora. Now, how did that occur? The housing costs in Denver are a little bit higher than the housing costs in Aurora, and it was a natural consequence that you would expect in a situation like this. These are real issues, and until we can wrap our arms around the evidence, the data, how it's happening, it's going to make it even more difficult to try to address these issues. Typically, you're going to have folks that want to downplay problems, right? I mean, move along, nothing to see here types of attitude, right? They don't want any type of negative reflection on a particular community, on a state. But in order to address a problem, you have to be able to identify the problem, and we are lacking in that particular area. DJ had to work magic and geolocate crimes that occur in a particular area and then compare that to what crimes look like beforehand. There should be a heck of a lot easier way to identify what the issues really are, so that way we can come up with real solutions to address them. And unfortunately, it is likely that the problem is going to get worse before it gets better, because we don't even have an understanding of the problem.
Thanks, Chief. And if I remember correctly, that report was really fascinating because it showed overall crime is decreasing in Aurora. But when Mitch and DJ were able to just isolate the 3 or 4 apartment complexes, that's where we're seeing that spike in crime data from 23 to 24. And just a reminder, guys, we don't have an agenda here. Common sense is focused on the data and the facts, and people deserve to know the best data and the trends that we have available to tell that story. Chris, do we have any questions, or should I ask the panel one more question?
We have plenty of questions.
Let's turn it to some Q&A. Thank you all again for those who submitted some questions. I'm going to have Chris read some off for our panel today.
Great. Well, let's start with Paul on the slaughterhouse and the Denver bans. I should specify which Paul, I guess. I'm sorry. So you talked about hats. What other products besides hats are part of the fur ban? And you mentioned the organization leading the initiative. Do you have any sense of the portion of funding from in-state, out-of-state supporting that initiative?
No, I don't know how they are funded, frankly, in-state, out-of-state, but I'm going to guess the majority of it is coming from out-of-state to fund the ultimate goal, which is the complete decimation of production agriculture across the world, okay? That's where they're wanting to go. Other products that would be impacted besides, anything made with a pelt, on the list would be obviously the cowboy hat, purses, teddy bears. Gosh, I had a list of like 10 or 15 things that rugs, obviously rugs, a lot of rugs are made with that. I know the Native American population and the powwow that happens at the Coliseum every March, the March powwow would be significantly impacted because their culture has a lot of those sort of products featured during the powwow. So that's really, you got to think of anything that would be made with an animal pelt would be impacted by this. Right now they've said they will allow cowhides, okay? I'm telling you their next step is the cow. So right now the cowboy boots I'm wearing are okay. But if this passes, the cowboy boots aren't going to be okay. They're going to go with the anything that might be made with a cowhide will be the next thing, along with, again, production agriculture and meat. Protein sources being raised by our ranchers would no longer be available in their ultimate goal. So.
Great. And as Kelly noted, I think a lot of fishing products, specifically on the fly fishing,
right, are
also included in those product lists. Okay, question for Lang, sort of related to property tax and I believe the fee report. They don't attribute this quote, but there's a saying that you can't tax yourself, you can't tax your way to prosperity. How would you respond? Is Colorado trying to tax themselves to prosperity?
I think that's the Arthur Laffer quote, I think, if I remember correctly. This is part of a broader question that, and I think the ultimate answer to the question is no, you cannot tax yourself or fee yourself, if you will, to prosperity. But this is part of a larger question that we've been dealing with at CSI for a while, and I'll give a little shout out and a teaser to our upcoming annual free enterprise report, and to Dr. Stephen Byers and the great team, Chris and others here who helped put that together. But we look at the issue of our competitiveness nationally and to some extent internationally. Where does Colorado fit in, and what is our trajectory in a number of different areas? And of course, we're looking at things like taxes and fees and regulation, quality of education, workforce, and so forth, and how does that all fit together? Because we make all these little policy decisions, and there are always arguments for and against many of these things. The 100 bills that Kelly mentioned that are sort of taking money out from under that Tabor cap. There are legitimate policy arguments in all of these. But the really important question that doesn't get asked, there are actually two of them. One is, what is the impact, what are the second and third order impacts of particular regulations, taxes, fees on the private sector, and how does that cascade through the economy? And then even more significantly, what is the aggregate impact of all the things that we're doing in these areas, and how do those aggregate impacts compare to what's going on in other states? How does that impact the migration of certain parts of our workforce, and how does that impact how expensive it is as a state here to live and do business? The last thing I'll mention is CNBC does a rating every year of how business-friendly various states are. And any 1 year snapshot you sort of look at and take it with a certain grain of salt. But we have seen a steady deterioration over the last several years in two important categories there. One is the cost of doing business, and the other one is the cost of living. So I hope that answers the question, but we have to be competitive in order to continue to thrive here.
And, unrelated to the ballot, but a quick plug for another report we just released yesterday related to inclusionary housing ordinance in Denver that directly relates to policy that in some way taxes housing development and the implications of that. Again, just released yesterday. We estimate Denver is about 30% down in terms of new housing permitting as a result of some of that tax. So it speaks directly to the question of taxing our way to prosperity and the impacts more broadly. Another question, or one question for Chief. It says maybe unfair. I don't think this is unfair at all, but if you had a magic wand, what would you do with the $350 million to increase the attraction for individuals to join law enforcement? How can that help highlight the key role law enforcement plays in our community and help erase any negative stigma?
Actually, that's a great question. I'm glad whoever asked that question did. There's significant challenges to recruitment and retention of law enforcement officers here in Colorado. So we talked a little bit about the state legislature and some of the challenges that they have gone through with regards to taxes in our economy. It's also been with laser focus on law enforcement. So SB 217, this is one that really hurt our ability in Denver in particular and across the state of Colorado to recruit officers from across the country. This particular bill, and there's a lot of aspects to it, but it deals with qualified immunity. Qualified immunity is governmental immunity, and what we've done is we've singled out law enforcement officers in this particular bill, that if an officer makes a bad decision, and officers make decisions in split seconds, not having a lot of discretionary time, they can be personally sued for their actions. Initially, that bill was going to add prosecutors, but the prosecutors pushed back and were able to take that off. Now, prosecutors have a lot of discretionary time to make decisions. If, for example, a 36-year-old woman is murdered with a bad decision made by the Denver district attorney on the suspect, the brother, the mother, the child can't sue the prosecutor the same way they could have if the officer made a bad decision. Similarly, if the judge releases somebody who has been arrested 3 times for violent crimes involving a weapon and puts them out on PR bond and they go on to commit murder and other crimes, those victims cannot hold the judge accountable. The legislature, if you pass a bill that essentially decriminalizes fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, and heroin, and hundreds upon hundreds of Coloradans lose their life to this deadly poison, you cannot hold that legislator accountable for their crimes. Not their crimes, their decisions that they made. Again, decisions that they have all the time in the world to take a look at. Parole boards, it just happened a couple of months ago, release somebody that shouldn't have been released. It goes on to kill 2 people. There is no accountability when, again, the parole officer or the parole board has all the time in the world to think this through and go from there. So if we're going to remove qualified immunity, it should be for all or restored for law enforcement, particularly when you have a challenge recruiting people. What this bill does, this proposition and initiative now does is it shows support for law enforcement of, we know about the House Bill 1912-63. We know about SB 271, which was misdemeanor reform that, again, shows more support for the individuals involved in criminal behavior than for our community. Same with SB 217, that we support our law enforcement, that if you're going to do this difficult and dangerous work, that we want to make sure that there's money, death, and disability for your family so that they could be supported, that there's more money for training, and there's more money to get additional officers. One of the single best ways, and our report last year bared this out, you compare Denver and Colorado Springs and how they support law enforcement, uniformed officers. Colorado Springs is doing a much better on addressing crime than Denver is, and that's because they've continued to support their uniformed police officers. People typically do not commit crime in the presence of a police officer. What the report showed is Colorado Springs prioritizes public safety and police as their number 1 budget item. Denver, it's their number 4 item, and there are fewer officers per capita in Denver than there are in Colorado Springs. So what this proposition, what this initiative does is it gives support to law enforcement to say, we want you to help keep us safe. We support you in the work that you do, and give opportunity to get more police officers, which should help reduce the crime issues that we're facing here in the state of Colorado.
Thanks, Chief. And Chris, I think we just have time for maybe one more question, so let's make it a good one.
I ran out of questions. I had a couple more statements. One was a question about the ranked choice voting. I just wanted to, clarify that was not an issue that we directly studied. I don't know if anyone on the panel had any thoughts or wanted to respond, but there was a question about several of the other measures on the ballot. Again, not one that CSI studied. And there was another question specifically about the powers of the legislature and outside groups to remove the property tax initiatives. And just to clarify, those were already removed. The organizations had until, I think, the 7th or 8th last week was the deadline from the Secretary of State to request that those initiatives be removed and not actually certified for the ballot. So I ran out of questions, but so thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you guys for lots of good questions. I would just mention there are 3 other ballot measure analyses that will be coming out that Common Sense is doing. I see Denver South. I see a lot of infrastructure partners here. There will be an analysis of RTD's debrucing measure. Earlier this year, Kelly Bruff, our urban development fellow, wrote a report on RTD. So we are doing an analysis on that one. And then 2 others. For our friends who live in Jefferson County and Arapahoe, there is a measure to debruce in those 2 counties. So we will be putting those out as well, so more to come. But I think with that, I'd really appreciate a round of applause for our wonderful panel. Thank you. And with that, I'm just going to ask Jen Waller, who is on CSI's board of directors, to close us out. Jen is also the president and the CEO of the Colorado Bankers Association. Thank you, Jen.
Well, thank you all for being here. I have a favor to ask of you. If you like what you heard today, I would ask that you please consider engaging with and supporting CSI, and there's a number of ways you can do that. You can check out the new website that just rolled out, I guess, in the middle of this program. You can subscribe to the newsletter, the podcast, follow CSI on social media, and please consider making a tax-deductible donation. At CBA, we consider this work extremely valuable. We use it to educate bankers, for bankers to educate and inform their customers, and probably more importantly, educate public officials that are making decisions on these extremely important issues that impact all of us. With your support, we can continue to maximize the research that CSI does. They engage on tons of issues. I'm always impressed with the amount of research they do and how quickly they're able to put out reports on issues that are bubbling up quite quickly. Real quick, I want to make sure and reference the Free Enterprise Summit that Kelly mentioned earlier. It's December 10th at Empower Field. Please consider purchasing a table or being a sponsor. And with that, that's it. Thank you all for joining us today.